April 10, 1972, Cam Lo River, Quang Tri Province, South Vietnam. The water was brown, moving slow, thick with sediment from the spring rains. Lieutenant Thomas Norris, 28 years old, Navy SEAL, crouched in elephant grass 6 feet tall and listened to 30,000 North Vietnamese soldiers moving through the jungle around him. He could hear them, voices, equipment rattling, tanks grinding forward on the roads, the entire Easter offensive, 3 divisions of NVA regulars pushing south toward Saigon. And somewhere in the middle of all that, 2 American pilots were hiding, waiting to die or be rescued. Norris adjusted the camouflage paint on his face, green and black streaks that turned skin into shadow. Next to him, Petty Officer Nguyen Van Kiet, a South Vietnamese SEAL, did the same. Kiet was small, 5 feet 4, maybe 130 pounds soaking wet. He looked like he should be farming rice, not crawling through enemy territory on a mission that intelligence had already written off as suicide. But Kit had eyes that didn't blink much and hands that stayed steady when mortars landed close. Norris trusted him more than he trusted most Americans. "How far?" Norris whispered, voice barely audible over the river sounds. Kiet studied the map, a plastic-covered sheet marked with coordinates updated hourly by radio intercepts. 3 kilometers, maybe 4. He spoke English with a French accent, remnant of colonial education. "Many NVA, very many." "Then we better be quiet." They slipped into the river. The water was warm, body temperature, the kind of warm that meant you couldn't tell where your skin ended and the water began. Norris held his car 15 above his head, keeping the barrel dry. Kit did the same with his AK-47, a weapon taken off a dead NVA soldier 2 years ago. They moved with the current, letting the river do the work, feet barely kicking. Silent, invisible. 2 men in a war zone where 30,000 enemy soldiers were hunting for downed American pilots. The mission had started 4 days ago when Lieutenant Colonel Isel Hambleton's EB-66 electronic warfare aircraft took a surface-to-air missile over Quang Tri Province. The plane disintegrated at 30,000 feet. Hambleton ejected, came down in a rice paddy 6 kilometers behind enemy lines. He was 53 years old, an intelligence officer, a man who knew classified information about bombing targets, radar systems, electronic warfare capabilities. Information the North Vietnamese would torture out of him if they captured him alive. He had to be rescued, or killed before he could talk. Those were the only 2 options. First Lieutenant Mark Clark, an OV-10 Bronco pilot, went down the next day trying to locate Hambleton. Shot down by anti-aircraft fire, ejected, landed 3 kilometers from Hambleton. Now there were 2 pilots on the ground, both hiding in vegetation, both surrounded by an entire NVA division preparing for a major offensive. The Air Force tried helicopter rescues. 3 helicopters shot down, 11 men killed. The mission was called off. Too dangerous. The pilots were written off as lost. Then someone remembered Thomas Norris. SEAL Team 2. The man who'd run reconnaissance missions so deep into enemy territory that his own command thought he was dead half the time. The man who'd walked into NVA base camps, counted troops, walked back out. The man who didn't understand the word impossible because no one had ever properly explained it to him. "Sanom, you want me to go get them?" Norris had asked when the briefing officer explained the situation. "We want you to try. No one expects you to succeed." Norris had looked at the map. 30,000 enemy troops, 3 divisions, tanks, artillery, anti-aircraft batteries, and 2 pilots somewhere in the middle of it all, hiding in grass, running out of food and water and hope. "I'll need a good partner." That's how he'd ended up with Kiet and 3 other South Vietnamese SEALs who'd volunteered for a mission that sounded like a creative way to commit suicide. They'd inserted by boat the first night, moving up the Cam Lo River in darkness, engine off, paddling with hands wrapped in cloth to muffle the sound. Made it 5 kilometers before NVA patrols forced them to hide in the riverbank, buried in mud up to their necks, breathing through reeds while soldiers walked past close enough to touch. The second night, they'd found Mark Clark. The pilot had been on the ground for 3 days, no food, drinking river water, hiding from patrols that passed within meters of his position. He was dehydrated, sunburned, barely coherent. Norris and Kiet had crawled to his position, moving 1 meter every 5 minutes, taking 4 hours to cover 200 meters. Clark had nearly shot them, thinking they were NVA. Norris had grabbed the pilot's hand, whispered, "American, American, don't shoot," and felt Clark's body go limp with relief. Getting Clark out had taken another full night. They'd moved only during darkness, Norris and Kiet taking turns carrying the pilot when he couldn't walk anymore. Through rice paddies, through villages occupied by NVA troops, past bunkers and fighting positions and artillery batteries. At one point, they'd hidden in a cemetery, lying among the graves, while an entire NVA company bivouacked 30 meters away, cooking rice, cleaning weapons, laughing. Norris had held his hand over Clark's mouth, feeling the pilot's panicked breathing, willing him to stay silent. They'd stayed there for 6 hours. When the NVA finally moved out at dawn, Norris and Kiet had carried Clark the last kilometer to the river and called for extraction. 1 pilot rescued, 1 to go. Hambleton was still out there, still hiding, still surrounded. And the NVA knew he was there now. They were searching, actively hunting, setting up ambushes along the river. The odds of getting him out had gone from impossible to suicidal. Norris went back in. That was 3 days ago. Now he was in the river again, moving through water that smelled like diesel fuel and rotting vegetation, listening to the sounds of an army that wanted him dead. Kiet moved beside him, silent as a shadow, reading the jungle the way some men read books. Every sound meant something, every smell told a story. Bird calls that weren't birds, insects that went silent when humans approached. The smell of cigarette smoke on the wind, meaning soldiers nearby. They moved for 6 hours that night, 6 hours to cover 4 kilometers. The river bent and twisted, oxbows and sandbars and places where the current ran fast over rocks. They avoided the fast water. Too loud, stayed in the slow sections, moving with the flow, barely disturbing the surface. Once they heard voices ahead, Vietnamese, casual conversation, and froze in place for 20 minutes until the voices moved away. Once they saw the silhouette of a sampan crossing the river, 3 soldiers aboard, AK-47s slung over their shoulders. Norris and Kiet sank beneath the surface, held their breath, let the boat pass overhead. When they came up, lungs burning, the sampan was gone. Dawn was coming. They could see it in the sky, black turning to gray. They had to find cover before full light. Being on the river in daylight was death. Kiet pointed to the bank, a section overhung with vegetation. They swam to it, pulled themselves into the mud, covered themselves with branches and leaves and grass. Then they waited. The day was endless. Heat climbed into the 90s. Humidity turned the air into soup. Mosquitoes swarmed, biting through the camouflage paint, drawing blood. Norris didn't move, didn't swat. Movement meant death. Kiet lay next to him, breathing slow and shallow, conserving energy. They could hear the NVA everywhere. Trucks on the roads, helicopters overhead, Soviet-made Mi-8s ferrying troops and supplies. Artillery firing in the distance, steady thumping that shook the ground. This wasn't a patrol area. This was the staging ground for an invasion. At noon, a patrol walked past their position. 6 soldiers, young, maybe 18 or 19, carrying AKs and RPGs. They were talking, complaining about the heat, about officers, about the war. Normal soldier talk. They stopped 10 meters from where Norris and Kiet were hidden, sat down in the shade, shared cigarettes. Norris watched them through gaps in the vegetation. He could see their faces, could see the sweat stains on their uniforms, could smell the fish sauce they were eating with their rice. One of the soldiers stood up, walked toward the riverbank, started unbuttoning his pants to urinate. He was walking straight toward Norris's position. Norris's hand moved to his knife, slow, silent. If the soldier saw them, Norris would have to kill him. Fast, quiet, then kill the others before they could raise an alarm. 6 men, maybe 10 seconds to do it. Maybe. Kiet's eyes met his. Kiet's hand was on his knife too. Ready. The soldier stopped, changed his mind, walked back to his friends. They finished their cigarettes, shouldered their weapons, moved on. Norris let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Kiet's hand relaxed on the knife handle. Night came slow. The sky went from blue to orange to purple to black. Stars came out, bright in a sky with no light pollution. Norris waited until full darkness, until the night sounds settled into their rhythm, until he was sure no patrols were close. Then he and Kiet slipped back into the river. Hambleton's last known position was 2 kilometers upstream, but that position was 12 hours old. He might have moved, might have been captured, might be dead. The radio beacon he was carrying had gone silent 6 hours ago. Either the battery died or the NVA found him and turned it off. Norris had to assume Hambleton was still alive, still hiding, still waiting. Had to believe the mission wasn't already over. They moved faster now. Time was running out. Hambleton had been on the ground for 5 days. No food, limited water, exposure, stress. Even if the NVA didn't find him, the jungle might kill him. Norris pushed harder, swimming against the current now, muscles burning. Kiet kept pace, smaller but stronger than he looked, farm kid strength, the kind that doesn't quit. At midnight they reached the coordinates, a bend in the river, dense vegetation on both banks. No sign of Hambleton, no movement, no sound except the river and the jungle and the distant rumble of artillery. Norris keyed his radio, short range, encrypted. Bat 21, Bat 21, this is Norris. Do you copy? Static, he tried again. Bat 21, if you can hear me, flash your signal mirror twice. Nothing. 30 seconds. A minute. Norris felt the weight of failure settling in. They were too late. The NVA had found him, or he'd died of exposure, or he'd moved and they were in the wrong place. 5 days of crawling through enemy territory, and they were too late. Then he saw it. A flicker of light. Quick. Twice. From the vegetation on the north bank, maybe 50 meters upstream. Hambleton. Norris and Kiet moved toward it, slow, careful, watching for ambushes. The NVA knew about the downed pilot. They might be using him as bait, waiting for rescuers. Every meter was a risk. Every sound could be an enemy soldier waiting in the dark. They reached the bank, pulled themselves into the mud, crawled forward. Hambleton was in a bomb crater, half filled with water, covered in vegetation. He looked like a corpse. Sunken eyes, skin burned and blistered, lips cracked and bleeding. 5 days in the jungle had aged him 20 years. He had a .38 revolver in his hand, pointed at Norris's face, shaking so badly he probably couldn't hit anything. Norris raised his hands slowly, whispered, "Colonel Hambleton, I'm Tom Norris, Navy SEAL. We're here to get you out." Hambleton stared at him. Didn't lower the gun. Didn't speak. Shock. Exhaustion. The edge of sanity worn down to nothing. Norris moved closer, slowly, talking the whole time. "It's okay, sir. You're safe now. We're Americans. We're here to help." He reached out, gently pushed the gun down. Hambleton's hand went limp. The gun fell into the mud. Then the pilot started crying, silent tears running down his face, shoulders shaking. "Can you walk?" Norris asked. Hambleton shook his head. I can't. That's okay. We'll carry you. Getting Hambleton to the river took an hour. He couldn't stand without help. Couldn't walk more than a few steps before his legs gave out. Norris and Kiet took turns supporting him, half carrying, half dragging him through the vegetation. Every sound made them freeze. Every light in the distance meant enemy soldiers. They moved in silence, communication by hand signals and eye contact, 3 men trying to be invisible in a jungle filled with people hunting them. They reached the river at 0200 hours. 4 hours until dawn. 4 hours to cover 6 kilometers through enemy-controlled territory with a pilot who could barely move. The math didn't work. They wouldn't make it to the extraction point before daylight, and daylight meant death. Norris made the decision. They'd hide during the day, move again the next night. 1 more day in enemy territory. 1 more day of lying in the mud while NVA patrols walked past. 1 more day of hoping they didn't get discovered. He keyed the radio, contacted the forward air controller orbiting overhead. "We have Bat-21. Extraction delayed 24 hours. We'll move to alternate LZ tomorrow night." The FAC's voice came back, crackling with static and disbelief. "Norris, you're going to stay in there another day." "Affirmative." "You're out of your mind." "Probably." Norris out. They found a hiding place in the riverbank, a section where the current had undercut the soil, creating a small cave beneath the roots of a tree. They pulled Hambleton inside, covered the entrance with vegetation, settled in to wait. Hambleton passed out almost immediately, body shutting down from exhaustion. Norris and Kiet took turns on watch, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, eyes scanning the jungle, ears tuned to every sound. The second day was worse than the first. The temperature hit 95 degrees. The humidity was suffocating. The small space under the riverbank became an oven. Hambleton developed a fever, shaking with chills despite the heat, mumbling incoherently. Norris gave him water from his canteen, rationing it carefully. They had maybe 12 hours of water left. After that, they'd have to drink from the river and hope they didn't get dysentery. At noon, an NVA patrol stopped directly above their hiding place. Norris could see their boots through gaps in the vegetation. Could hear them talking, radios crackling. They were searching the riverbank. Methodically, carefully. Someone had reported activity in the area. The patrol was checking every possible hiding place. Norris's hand moved to his car 15. Selector switch to full auto, 30 rounds in the magazine. If they were discovered, he'd empty the magazine into the soldiers above them, grab Hambleton, run for the river. Maybe make it 50 meters before they were cut down. Maybe. One of the soldiers squatted down, peering into the vegetation. Norris could see his face, young, serious, eyes scanning. The soldier's gaze passed over the hiding spot, moved on, came back. He was looking right at them, right at the cave entrance. Norris held his breath, finger on the trigger. The soldier stood up, said something to his companions. They laughed, moved on. The patrol continued down the river bank, checking other spots, eventually disappeared into the jungle. Norris let out his breath. Kiet was staring at him, eyes wide. That was too close. Way too close. Hambleton hadn't even noticed, lost in fever dreams, mumbling about his wife, his kids, coordinates for bombing runs. Classified information spilling out in delirium. Norris put his hand over the pilot's mouth, muffling the words. If Hambleton kept talking, someone would hear. Night came again. The 4th night. Norris and Kiet pulled Hambleton out of the hiding place, got him into the river. The pilot was worse now, barely conscious, unable to help himself. They'd have to carry him the entire way. 6 kilometers, through enemy territory, with a man who couldn't swim, couldn't walk, couldn't stay quiet. Norris looked at Kiet. "You ready?" Kiet smiled, the first smile Norris had seen in 4 days. "I am ready to go home." "Me too." They moved. Norris supported Hambleton from one side, Kiet from the other, keeping his head above water, moving with the current. Slow, steady, silent. The river was their highway and their cover, the one place the NVA couldn't easily patrol. But it was also exposed. No place to hide if someone saw them. No cover if someone started shooting. They were committed now. Forward or death. Those were the only options. At 100 hours, they passed under a bridge. NVA soldiers on it, smoking cigarettes, talking. Norris and Kiet sank lower in the water, just eyes and noses above the surface, holding Hambleton between them. The pilot's head lolled back, mouth open. Norris tilted it forward, keeping water out of his airway. They drifted under the bridge, current carrying them, invisible in the darkness. The soldiers above never looked down. At 0300 hours, they reached the extraction point, a bend in the river, south bank, marked by coordinates that Norris had memorized. He keyed the radio. "This is Norris. We're at the LZ, ready for extraction." "Copy, Norris. Birds inbound." "ETA 5 minutes. 5 minutes. 300 seconds. Norris pulled Hambleton onto the bank, checked his pulse. Weak but steady. The pilot was alive. Barely, but alive. Kiet covered the approaches, AK-47 ready, watching for patrol. The jungle was quiet. Too quiet. Either they'd made it clean, or the NVA was waiting to spring an ambush when the helicopters arrived. Norris heard the helicopters before he saw them. Thump, thump, thump of rotor blades, coming in low and fast. 2 Hueys, door guns manned, flying nap of the earth to avoid radar and anti-aircraft fire. They flared over the LZ, skids touching down, engines screaming. Go, go, go. Norris and Kiet grabbed Hambleton, ran for the nearest helicopter, threw him aboard. Door gunners reached down, pulled him in. Norris climbed aboard, turned back. Kiet was still on the ground, covering their 6, AK-47 pointed at the tree line. "Kiet, let's go." Kiet fired a burst into the jungle, suppressive fire, then ran for the helicopter. Muzzle flashes erupted from the tree line. The NVA had been waiting. Rounds punched through the Huey's fuselage. The door gunner opened up, M60 hammering. Kiet dove through the door, landed on the deck. The helicopter lifted, nose down, accelerating. Tracer rounds chased them into the sky, red streaks in the darkness. Then they were out, climbing, the LZ falling away behind them. Norris looked at Hambleton. The pilot was unconscious, medics working on him, starting IVs, checking vitals. He'd make it. Probably. Maybe. Norris looked at Kiet. The Vietnamese SEAL was grinning, adrenaline high, hands shaking. "We did it," Kiet said. "Yeah, we did it." 4 nights, 30,000 enemy troops, 6 kilometers of river crawling through a war zone. 2 pilots rescued. 11 men had died trying to get them out before Norris and Kiet succeeded. The mission was classified for 20 years. No medals, no recognition, just a folder in a filing cabinet marked Top Secret. Thomas Norris received the Medal of Honor in 1976, 4 years later, after the war ended and the files were declassified. Nguyen Van Kiet received nothing. He was South Vietnamese, and by 1976, South Vietnam didn't exist anymore. The country had fallen. Kiet had escaped to the United States, lived in obscurity, worked as a fisherman. It wasn't until 2003 that someone remembered to give him the Navy Cross, 31 years after the mission. By then, he was an old man, gray-haired, quiet, still didn't talk much about the war. A reporter asked him once why he'd volunteered for the mission, knowing it was suicide. Kiet had shrugged. "Mr. Norris asked me to go. So I went." That simple, that direct. No grand statements about courage or duty. Just a man who'd been asked to do something impossible and said yes. April 1972. 2 men crawled through 30,000 enemy soldiers to rescue 2 pilots everyone else had written off as dead. They did it with patience and silence and a refusal to accept failure. They did it because someone had to and no one else would. 4 nights in hell, and they came back with both pilots alive. Thomas Norris was shot in the head 3 years later during another mission, lost an eye, medically retired. He became an FBI agent, served for 20 years, never talked about Vietnam unless someone asked directly. Nguyen Van Kiet lived quietly in California, fished, raised a family, died in 2020 at age 79. The 2 men stayed in contact for 40 years, friends bonded by 4 nights in a river, surrounded by an army that wanted them dead. Hambleton lived until 2004. He never forgot the 2 men who came for him when everyone else had given up. Every year on April 13th, the day he was rescued, he called Norris and Kiet to say thank you. Every year, for 32 years, until his death, because some debts can never be repaid, only acknowledged. 2 men, 4 nights, 30,000 enemy troops, and a refusal to leave anyone behind.